Catherine Fairfax stood in the snow outside Ravenshollow Manor, her heart pounding like a drum. The massive oak door loomed before her, dark and forbidding in the winter twilight. She had not seen this place in 12 years. She had not seen him in 12 years. The Duke of Ravenshollow had summoned her with a single line written in his butler's careful script. His Grace requires your assistance for the winter months. No explanation, no apology for the years of silence, just a command that she could not refuse, not when her family's debts hung over them like storm clouds. She lifted the heavy brass knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed through the stone walls like a death knell. The door opened, and James Morrison, the butler she remembered from her childhood, stood before her. His hair had gone completely grey, and lines mapped the years across his face. "Miss Fairfax," he said with a slight bow. "His Grace is expecting you in the library." Catherine handed him her travelling bag and followed him through corridors that felt both familiar and strange. The portraits on the walls watched her with painted eyes as she passed. Members of the Blackwood family, stretching back centuries. She remembered running through these halls as a child, her laughter ringing off the vaulted ceilings. Now her footsteps sounded hollow and uncertain. Morrison stopped before the library doors. "His Grace has been different since the accident," he said quietly. "He does not receive visitors. You are the first in many years." Catherine nodded, though her throat felt tight. She knew about the accident. Everyone in the county knew. 5 years ago, Alexander Blackwood, the 7th Duke of Ravenshollow, had been thrown from his horse during a storm. The fall had stolen his sight and nearly killed him. What people did not know was that Catherine had loved him since she was 17 years old, and that he had broken her heart so completely that she had fled to London and vowed never to return. The library doors opened, and there he was. Alexander sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his dark hair longer than fashion dictated, his face turned toward the fire that crackled in the hearth. He looked older, harder somehow, with lines around his eyes that spoke of pain. But he was still the most beautiful man she had ever seen. "Catherine," he said without turning his head. His voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by years of solitude. "You came." She stood frozen in the doorway, memories washing over her like a tide. The last time she had seen him, he had been kissing Miss Penelope Hartwell at the midsummer ball, announcing their engagement to the entire county. Catherine had watched from the gallery above, her heart shattering like glass on stone. "You said you needed my assistance," she managed to say. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too high and breathless. Alexander turned his head toward the sound of her voice, and she saw his eyes for the first time in 12 years. They were the same warm brown she remembered, but now they looked through her rather than at her. The accident had taken his sight, but not his beauty. If anything, the years had carved his features into something more striking, more dangerous. "I did," he said simply. "Please, sit down." Catherine moved to the chair across from his desk, her legs unsteady. The room smelled of leather and wood smoke, exactly as it had when she was a child and would sneak in here to read his father's books. "I need someone to be my eyes," Alexander said. His hands rested flat on the desktop, long fingers spread wide. Catherine remembered those hands, how they had felt when he had helped her down from her horse during their childhood rides. "The estate requires attention that I cannot give it alone. My steward died last month, and I have been unable to find a suitable replacement." Catherine stared at him, trying to understand. "You want me to help run Ravenshollow?" she asked. Alexander nodded. "For the winter months, at least. Until I can make other arrangements." His voice was carefully neutral, as if he were discussing the weather rather than asking her to upend her life. "Why me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Alexander was silent for a long moment, his sightless eyes fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. "Because you know this place," he said finally. "You know these people, and because—" he stopped, his jaw tightening. "Because I trust you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Trust. After everything that had happened between them, after the way he had dismissed her feelings as a childish infatuation, after he had chosen another woman and never looked back. "I see," she said, though she saw nothing at all. The whole situation felt like stepping into a dream where nothing made sense. Alexander leaned forward slightly. "I can pay you well," he said. "Enough to settle your father's debts." Catherine's breath caught. How did he know about her father's gambling losses? How did he know that she had been working as a governess in London, sending every spare penny home to keep the creditors at bay? "How do you know about that?" she asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I may be blind, Catherine, but I am not deaf. I hear things." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. The thought of him keeping track of her life, knowing about her family's struggles while she had heard nothing from him for 12 years, made her angry. "What happened to Miss Hartwell?" she asked, before she could think better of it. The question hung in the air between them, like smoke. Alexander's face went very still. "She married someone else," he said quietly. 3 months after my accident, Catherine felt a stab of something that might have been satisfaction, followed immediately by shame. No one deserved to be abandoned because of an injury, not even Alexander Blackwood. "I am sorry," she said, and meant it. Alexander shrugged, as if it did not matter, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "It was for the best," he said. "She would not have been happy here." "And you think I will be?" The words slipped out before Catherine could stop them. Alexander turned his head toward her again, and for a moment she felt as if he could see straight through to her soul. "I think you understand duty," he said. "I think you understand what it means to put others before yourself." His words stung, because they were true. She had spent the last 12 years doing exactly that, caring for her family, working to support them, putting her own dreams aside. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Duty." Alexander was quiet for so long that she wondered if he had heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not know what else to call it." Catherine looked around the library, at the books that lined the walls from floor to ceiling, at the fire that cast dancing shadows across the room. This place had been her sanctuary once, when her own home had been full of her father's rages and her mother's tears. She had been happy here, before everything had gone wrong. "One winter," she said finally. Alexander's hands tightened on the desk. "One winter," he agreed. "That is all I ask." But Catherine could hear something else in his voice, something that sounded almost like hope. She wondered if he knew that she could read him as easily as she could read the books on his shelves, blind or not. Morrison appeared in the doorway as if summoned by some invisible signal. "Miss Fairfax's room is ready," he announced. Catherine rose from her chair, suddenly exhausted by the weight of the decision she had just made. "I will need to see the estate books tomorrow," she said to Alexander. He nodded. "Morrison will show you everything you need to know." As she turned to leave, Alexander spoke again. "Catherine." She stopped, her hand on the doorframe. "Thank you." The simple words carried a weight that made her chest tighten. She did not trust herself to speak, so she simply nodded and followed Morrison from the room. Her childhood bedroom had been prepared for her. The same blue and white tile wallpaper she remembered, the same view of the rose garden from the window. Someone had lit a fire in the grate and left fresh flowers on the bedside table. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed and stared out at the snow-covered grounds. What had she done? How could she spend an entire winter in this house with Alexander, pretending that her heart did not still skip when she heard his voice. She had built a life in London, modest but independent. She had convinced herself that she was over him, that the girl who had loved him so desperately was gone. But 5 minutes in his presence had proven how wrong she was. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. A young maid entered, carrying a tea tray. She was pretty, with dark curls and bright eyes, perhaps 20 years old. "I am Mary, miss," she said with a curtsy. "I am to help you while you are here." Catherine smiled at her. "Thank you, Mary. Has he been well?" Mary's expression grew careful. "His Grace keeps to himself mostly, miss. He does not like strangers in the house, but he seemed different today, after your letter came. Less angry, if you do not mind me saying." Catherine did not mind. In fact, it gave her a strange comfort to know that her coming had affected him, even slightly. That night, Catherine lay awake, listening to the wind howl around the manor's walls. She could hear the old house settling, familiar creaks and sighs that brought back memories of childhood visits. Her parents had been friends with Alexander's parents, the late Duke and Duchess. Catherine had spent countless summers here, following Alexander around like a devoted puppy. He had been 7 years older, already a young man when she was still a child, but he had been kind to her. He had taught her to ride, had shared his books with her, had listened to her chatter about everything and nothing. When had she fallen in love with him? She could not pinpoint the exact moment. It had been gradual, like sunrise, until one day she had looked at him and known that she would love him until the day she died. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Catherine dressed carefully in her best wool dress, dark blue with white trim, and made her way downstairs. She found Alexander in the breakfast room, sitting alone at the long table. He was dressed simply in dark trousers and a white shirt, no cravat or jacket. His hair was still damp from washing, and she could smell the soap he had used, clean and masculine. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned his head toward her voice. "Good morning, Catherine. I trust you slept well." She poured herself tea from the service on the sideboard and took a seat across from him. "Well enough," she lied. "Where would you like me to start?" Alexander had obviously been thinking about this. "The tenant farms," he said. "There have been complaints about repairs not being made, rents not collected properly. My former steward was unwell toward the end." Catherine nodded, then remembered he could not see her. "I understand," she said. "I will need to visit them, see what needs to be done." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You should take someone with you," he said. "These are not the gentle farmers you remember from childhood. Some have become difficult." Catherine heard the frustration in his voice, the helplessness of a man who had once controlled everything and now could not even see his own lands. "Come with me," she said impulsively. Alexander went very still. "I beg your pardon." Catherine felt her cheeks warm, but she pressed on. "Come with me to visit the tenants. You know them better than anyone. They need to see their duke, to know you still care about their welfare." Alexander shook his head. "I cannot. I am not." He stopped, his hands clenching on the table. "I am not the man I was." The pain in his voice cut through Catherine like a knife. She leaned forward. "You are still the Duke of Ravenshollow," she said firmly. "These people depend on you. They need to know you have not abandoned them." Alexander was quiet for a long time. Catherine could see the struggle playing out across his face, pride warring with necessity. Finally he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Very well," he said. "But you will be my eyes, Catherine. You will tell me what I need to see." The phrase sent a shiver through her. His eyes. She would be his eyes. "Of course," she said softly. They finished breakfast in companionable silence. and then Morrison brought Alexander's coat and gloves. Catherine watched him dress, noting how his fingers found the buttons and clasps with practiced ease. He had learned to navigate his blindness with grace, but she could see the careful concentration it required. The stable master brought around a sturdy cart rather than riding horses. Alexander's face darkened when he heard the wheels on the cobblestones. "I used to ride everywhere," he said quietly. Catherine climbed up beside him and took the reins. "You still could," she said. With practice, Alexander turned his head toward her, and she saw surprise flicker across his features. "You think so?" he asked. Catherine smiled, though he could not see it. "I know so," she said. "You taught me that nothing is impossible if you want it badly enough." She had thrown his own words back at him, words he had spoken to her when she was 10 years old and convinced she could never learn to jump her pony over the stone wall in the paddock. Their first stop was Bramblewood Farm, where the Henley family had worked the land for 3 generations. The farmhouse roof was missing several tiles, and the barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Thomas Henley came out to meet them, his face brightening when he saw Alexander. "Your Grace," he said with a deep bow. "We did not expect you." Catherine watched Alexander straighten in his seat, every inch the Duke, despite his blindness. "Mr. Henley," he said formally, "I understand there have been problems with repairs." Thomas glanced nervously at Catherine, then back at Alexander. "Well, yes, Your Grace. The roof has been leaking something fierce, and my Sarah, she caught a fever from the damp." Catherine described the damage she could see to Alexander in quiet tones, and she watched him process the information. "The repairs will be made within the week," Alexander said. "You have my word." Thomas's relief was visible. "Thank you, Your Grace. We were not sure, that is, after Mr. Whitmore died. We thought perhaps—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "You thought I had forgotten you," Alexander said, and there was steel in his voice. "I have not forgotten anyone on this estate, Mr. Henley. My blindness does not extend to my responsibilities." Catherine felt a surge of pride at his words. This was the Alexander she remembered, strong and determined. They visited 6 more farms that day, and at each one Catherine served as Alexander's eyes, describing repairs that needed to be made, animals that looked unwell, children who seemed too thin. Alexander listened to every word, asked thoughtful questions, and made decisions with the same authority he had always possessed. Catherine watched the tenants' faces as they spoke with their Duke, saw their relief, and renewed hope. By the time they returned to the manor, the sun was setting, and both of them were exhausted. "Thank you," Alexander said, as Morrison helped him down from the cart. "For today. For showing me what I could not see." Catherine felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. That evening they dined together in the smaller family dining room rather than the formal stateroom. Alexander had changed into evening dress, and Catherine wore her best gown, a deep green silk that she had bought in London with her first governess wages. "Tell me about London," Alexander said as they ate. "Is it very different from here?" Catherine found herself describing her life there, the families she had worked for, the small apartment she had shared with another governess, the theatres and museums she had visited on her rare days off. Alexander listened intently, asking questions about the children she had taught, the books she had read, the places she had seen. "Do you miss it?" he asked finally. Catherine considered the question. "Parts of it," she said honestly. "The independence, mostly. The feeling that I was making my own way in the world." Alexander nodded slowly. "I can understand that," he said. "I have not felt independent since the accident. I have felt like a burden, a shadow of what I once was." The admission surprised Catherine with its honesty. "You are not a burden," she said firmly. What we accomplished today proves that those families needed their duke, and you were there for them." Alexander's smile was small but genuine. "With your help," he said. "I could not have done it without your eyes." As the days passed, Catherine settled into a routine at Ravenshollow. She spent her mornings going over the estate books with Morrison, her afternoons visiting tenants or overseeing repairs, and her evenings with Alexander. They dined together each night, talking about the day's work, the estate's needs, sometimes the books they had both read. Alexander had an extensive library in Braille, and Catherine was fascinated to watch his fingers move across the raised dots as he read. "It is slower than sight," he admitted one evening, "but it allows me to read again, which I thought I had lost forever." Catherine watched him read, noting the concentration on his face, the way his hands moved with delicate precision. One evening in early December, Catherine found Alexander in the music room, seated at the grand piano. His fingers moved across the keys with the same careful grace they showed when he read, picking out a melody she did not recognize. "That is beautiful," she said softly from the doorway. Alexander's hands stilled on the keys. "I did not hear you come in," he said. "I am sorry, I did not mean to disturb you." Catherine came into the room and sat in the chair beside the piano bench. "Please, do not stop," she said. "I love to hear you play." Alexander resumed the melody, and Catherine closed her eyes to listen. The music was melancholy and beautiful, full of longing. "What is that piece?" she asked, when he finished. Alexander's hands remained on the keys. "Something I wrote," he said quietly. "After the accident, when I thought I would never find beauty in the world again." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," she said truthfully. Alexander turned toward her voice, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Music is one of the few things that feels the same," he said. "It does not require sight." Catherine wanted to tell him that there were many things that did not require sight, but she sensed this was not the time for platitudes. "Will you play something else?" she asked instead. Alexander's fingers found the keys again, this time playing a piece she recognized, a Mozart sonata they had heard performed at a concert in London years ago. Catherine remembered that concert, remembered sitting in the gallery while Alexander sat in the family box below with his parents. She had watched him the entire evening, memorizing the way the candlelight played across his face, the way he listened to the music with such focused attention. "You remember this?" she said when he finished. Alexander nodded. "I remember everything about that evening," he said softly. "Even you watching me from the gallery." Catherine's breath caught. "You knew I was there?" she asked. Alexander's smile was sad. "I always knew when you were watching me, Catherine, even when we were children." The admission sent heat through her chest. If he had known, then he had also known how she felt about him, which made his engagement to Miss Hartwell even more painful. "Then you knew," she began, but could not finish the sentence. Alexander's hands tightened on the piano keys. "I knew," he said simply, "and I am sorry for the way I handled things. I was young and foolish and thought I knew what was best for everyone. And Miss Hartwell was what was best." The question came out sharper than Catherine intended. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Hartwell was what was expected," he said finally. "A suitable marriage, a proper alliance between our families. What I felt for her was," he paused, searching for words, "comfortable, safe. Nothing like—" He stopped again, and Catherine held her breath. "Nothing like what?" she prompted. Alexander turned his head toward her, and she saw something raw and honest in his sightless eyes. "Nothing like what I felt for you," he said quietly. "What I have always felt for you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that neither of them dared to cross. Catherine stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Then why," she whispered, Why did you choose her? Alexander's face was full of pain. Because I was 7 years older than you, he said. Because you were barely 18, and I thought your feelings were those of a child. Because I was a coward who was afraid of what loving you might mean. Catherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. All these years, all this pain, because he had been trying to protect her. I was not a child, she said softly. I knew my own heart. Alexander reached out tentatively, his hand moving through the air until it found her face. His fingers traced the path of her tears with infinite gentleness. I know that now, he said. I have known it for 12 years, but it was too late. You were gone, and I had made my choice. Catherine closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. His hand was warm and strong, exactly as she remembered. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. The confession tore from her throat like a physical thing. Alexander cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Nor I you, he said. Not for a single day. They sat like that for a long moment, Alexander's hands on her face, Catherine's eyes closed, both of them afraid to move or speak lest they break the spell. Finally, Alexander spoke. I have no right to ask this of you, he said. I am not the man I was. I cannot offer you the life you deserve. Catherine opened her eyes, even though he could not see them. What life do I deserve? She asked. A life of loneliness in London, a life of caring for other people's children while dreaming of my own. Alexander's hands tightened on her face. You deserve everything, he said fiercely. Love and laughter and children and a man who can see your beauty. I do not need you to see my beauty, Catherine said, covering his hands with her own. I need you to feel it. Alexander drew in a sharp breath. Slowly, carefully, he traced the shape of her face with his fingertips, mapping every curve and angle. His touch was reverent, as if he were memorizing something precious. You are more beautiful than I remembered, he whispered. More beautiful than my dreams. Catherine felt her heart break and heal at the same time. This was what she had wanted for 12 years, this moment of perfect understanding between them. Alexander, she breathed. He leaned forward, and their foreheads touched. May I kiss you? He asked softly. Catherine's answer was to close the distance between them. Their lips met gently at first, tentatively, as if they were both afraid this might be a dream. Then Alexander's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and hungry. 12 years of longing poured into that kiss, 12 years of wondering and waiting and wanting. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I have wanted to do that since I was 18 years old, Catherine said against his lips. Alexander smiled, the first truly happy smile she had seen from him since her return. I have wanted to do that since you were 18 years old, he replied. They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, for the first time since Catherine's return. Alexander told her about the accident, about the months of darkness and despair that had followed, about learning to navigate the world without sight. Catherine told him about London, about the loneliness of her life there, about the nights she had lain awake thinking of him. They talked until the fire burned low and the clock chimed midnight, neither wanting to break the fragile connection they had rebuilt. When Catherine finally rose to go to her room, Alexander caught her hand. Will you stay tomorrow? He asked. After the winter, I mean. Will you stay? Catherine looked down at their joined hands, his pale and long-fingered, hers smaller and work-roughened from her years as a governess. Ask me again in the spring, she said softly. When winter is over and you are sure this is what you want. Alexander brought her hand to his lips and kissed her palm gently. I have been sure for 12 years, he said. But I will wait until spring. I will wait as long as it takes. Catherine squeezed his hand and then reluctantly pulled away. "Good night, Alexander," she said. "Good night, my dear Catherine," he replied. As she walked to her room, Catherine felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time since her return to Raven's Hollow, she felt hope. The next few weeks passed in a haze of happiness that Catherine had never experienced before. She and Alexander worked together during the days, managing the estate, visiting tenants, planning improvements, but it was the evenings she treasured most. They would dine together, then retire to the library or the music room, where Alexander would read to her or play the piano while she watched his face in the firelight. Sometimes they would simply sit together, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Alexander's hand holding hers, he was learning to be comfortable with his blindness, no longer flinching when she described things to him or hiding away from the world. Catherine was amazed by how quickly Alexander adapted when he put his mind to it. She convinced him to try riding again, and after a few nervous attempts, he was back on horseback with Catherine beside him, her voice guiding him along familiar paths. "I had forgotten how good this feels," he said one afternoon as they walked their horses through the snow-covered woods. The wind, the movement, the sense of freedom. Catherine watched him, noting how straight he sat in the saddle, how naturally he moved with his horse. "You are always an excellent rider," she said. "That has not changed." Alexander smiled, his face turned toward the winter sun. "Many things have not changed," he said meaningfully. Christmas approached, and Catherine threw herself into decorating the manor. She enlisted the help of the servants, and soon every room was filled with evergreen boughs, holly and ivy. She found the old Christmas decorations in the attic, carefully preserved ornaments that had belonged to Alexander's family for generations. "Tell me how it looks," Alexander said as they stood in the great hall on Christmas Eve, admiring the enormous tree that Catherine had insisted they cut from the estate. Catherine described the tree in detail, the way the candles flickered among the branches, the way the glass ornaments caught the light. "It sounds beautiful," Alexander said softly. "I wish I could see it." Catherine took his hand. "You can," she said, "just not with your eyes." She guided his hand to the tree, letting him feel the rough bark of the trunk, the smooth wax of the candles, the delicate glass of the ornaments. Alexander smiled as his fingers traced the shapes, his face full of wonder. "It is beautiful," he said. "Thank you for bringing Christmas back to Raven's Hollow." That night, they attended Christmas service in the village church, Alexander's first public appearance since the accident. Catherine saw the surprise and pleasure on the villagers' faces when their duke walked into the sanctuary, his hand on Catherine's arm. During the service, Alexander's voice rang out strong and true during the hymns, and Catherine felt tears of pride sting her eyes. After the service, several villagers approached to speak with Alexander, and Catherine watched him respond with grace and warmth. "It is good to see you out and about, Your Grace," said Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife. "We have missed you." Alexander smiled. "I have missed all of you as well," he said. "Miss Fairfax has helped me remember that being blind does not mean being invisible." Catherine felt a warm glow at his words. As they walked back to the manor through the snow, Alexander said quietly, "Thank you for making me remember who I am." Catherine squeezed his arm. "You never forgot," she said. "You just needed someone to remind you." Christmas Day dawned bright and clear. Catherine woke to find a small wrapped package on her bedside table. Inside was a delicate gold locket, heart-shaped and engraved with her initials. She opened it to find a lock of dark hair inside, and she knew without asking that it was Alexander's. Her heart swelled with emotion as she fastened the chain around her neck. She found Alexander in the breakfast room, and when she thanked him for the gift, he simply smiled. "I wanted you to have something to remember this winter by," he said. Catherine's gift to him was a new Braille volume of poetry that she had ordered from London. Alexander's fingers traced the title page with reverence. "Byron," he said with pleasure. "I have not read him in years." They spent Christmas Day quietly together, just the two of them and the servants. Catherine read to Alexander from his new book while he played with her hair, his fingers combing through the long strands with gentle pleasure. "I love the way your hair feels," he murmured. "Like silk." Catherine closed her eyes, enjoying his touch. They were growing more comfortable with physical affection, small touches and caresses that spoke of their deepening intimacy. Alexander would trace patterns on her hand while they talked, or stroke her cheek when he wanted to emphasize a point. Catherine found herself watching his mouth when he spoke, remembering their kiss, wondering when it might happen again. The answer came on New Year's Eve. They had spent the evening reminiscing about past celebrations, comparing memories of their childhoods. As midnight approached, they stood together in the library, listening to the clock chime the hour. "Happy New Year, Catherine," Alexander said softly. "Happy New Year," she replied. This time she was the one who leaned in for the kiss. It was deeper than their first, full of promise and desire. When they broke apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you for so long that I cannot remember a time when I did not." Catherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered, "more than I ever thought possible." January brought the worst snowstorm in decades. For 3 days they were completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in the manor with only each other for company. Catherine found that she did not mind at all. She and Alexander spent long hours in front of the fire, talking, reading, playing chess. Alexander was an excellent chess player, even without sight, the pieces carved with different textures so he could identify them by touch. "You are cheating," Catherine accused, when he won their 4th game in a row. Alexander laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I am not cheating," he said. "I am simply better at this than you are." Catherine threw a pillow at him, which he caught with startling accuracy. One evening during the storm, Catherine found Alexander in his study, standing before the window with his hand pressed against the glass. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. Alexander did not turn around. "Listening to the storm," he said, feeling the cold through the glass, trying to imagine what it looks like. Catherine came to stand beside him, describing the scene outside, the snow swirling in great gusts, the trees bending in the wind, the way the world had been transformed into something otherworldly and beautiful. "It sounds magnificent," Alexander said. "Dangerous, but magnificent." Catherine looked at his profile, noting the way the candlelight played across his features. "Like you," she said softly. Alexander turned toward her, surprise flickering across his face. "Am I dangerous?" he asked with a slight smile. "Very," Catherine said, moving closer to him. "You are dangerous to my peace of mind, to my carefully ordered life, to my ability to think clearly." Alexander's arms came around her waist, pulling her against him. "Good," he murmured against her ear. "I would hate to be the only one affected." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the storm raged outside. Catherine could feel Alexander's heart beating against her cheek, strong and steady. This was what she had dreamed of for 12 years, this sense of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be. When the storm finally passed, Catherine almost wished it would return. She wanted to stay in this cocoon of intimacy forever. February brought a thaw, and with it, news from the outside world. A letter arrived from Catherine's sister in London, full of gossip and news about mutual acquaintances. "Lady Pemberton's daughter is engaged to that awful Hartley boy," Catherine read aloud over breakfast, "and the Weatherbys have lost their fortune in some speculation gone wrong." Alexander listened without comment. until Catherine folded the letter and set it aside. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The society, the gossip, the constant round of social events?" Catherine considered the question. "No," she said finally. "I thought I might, but I do not. I am happier here than I have ever been anywhere else." Alexander's face grew serious. "Even though you are buried in the country with a blind man who can offer you little in the way of excitement?" Catherine reached across the table and took his hand. "Especially because of that," she said firmly. "You are not a liability, Alexander. You are not less than you were. You are simply different, and I love every part of who you are now." Alexander brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I do not know what I did to deserve you," he said softly, "but I thank God for it every day." Catherine felt her heart swell with love for this man who still saw himself as damaged when she saw only strength and beauty. As March approached, Catherine found herself growing anxious. Spring was coming, and with it, the end of their agreed-upon winter together. She had promised to stay until spring, but she had not promised to stay beyond that. Alexander had not brought up the subject again since that night in December, but she could sense his growing tension as well. They were both waiting for something, some sign or decision that would determine their future. Catherine knew what she wanted, but she also knew that Alexander needed to be sure, needed to believe that he could offer her a real life together, not just a winter of hiding away from the world. The decision was forced upon them by an unexpected visitor. In mid-March, just as the first crocuses were pushing through the snow, a carriage arrived at Ravenshollow. Catherine watched from the library window as an elegant woman stepped down, her travelling dress expensive and fashionable. "Who is it?" Alexander asked, noting Catherine's sudden stillness. "Miss Hartwell," Catherine said quietly. "Miss Penelope Hartwell." Alexander's face went white. "What does she want?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Catherine continued to watch as the woman approached the front door. "I suppose we are about to find out," she said. Morrison's knock on the library door came moments later. Miss Hartwell swept into the library like a force of nature, all golden hair and blue eyes and expensive perfume. She was even more beautiful than Catherine remembered, with the kind of polished elegance that came from years of wealth and privilege. "Alexander," she said warmly, moving toward him with outstretched hands. "My dear Alexander, how wonderful to see you looking so well." Alexander stood stiffly, making no move to take her hands. "Miss Hartwell," he said formally, "this is unexpected." Penelope's eyes flicked to Catherine with barely concealed curiosity. "And you must be the governess," she said dismissively. "How good of you to help Alexander through his difficulties." Catherine felt her temper flare at the condescending tone, but she kept her expression neutral. "Miss Fairfax is managing my estate," Alexander said coldly. "She is not a governess here." Penelope's eyebrows rose. "How modern of you," she said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "I suppose one must make do." She turned back to Alexander, her expression softening into what Catherine recognized as calculated vulnerability. "Alexander, I must speak with you privately. There are things that need to be said, apologies that need to be made." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I think not," he said. "We have nothing to discuss." But Penelope was not so easily dismissed. "Please," she said, reaching for his arm. "I know I hurt you terribly, but you must understand. I was young and frightened. The thought of caring for an invalid, of giving up my life," she let the words trail off, her implication clear. Catherine felt sick at the casual cruelty of it. Alexander stepped back, away from her touch. "And now?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "What has changed?" Penelope moved closer to him, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I have grown up," she said. I have realized what I lost when I walked away from you. I want to make amends, Alexander. I want to come home." Catherine felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This was what she had been dreading, the moment when Alexander's past would catch up with their fragile happiness. She watched his face, looking for any sign of his feelings, but he had withdrawn behind the mask of ducal dignity he wore when he was uncertain. "Home?" he repeated. "This was never your home, Penelope. You made that clear when you left." But Penelope was nothing if not persistent. "I was wrong," she said, tears gathering in her voice. "I know that now. I have had 3 years to think about my mistakes, 3 years to regret my cowardice. I love you, Alexander. I have always loved you." The words hit Catherine like physical blows. She stood frozen, watching the woman she had always known was her rival pour out declarations of love to the man Catherine had just begun to believe might be hers. Alexander was silent for a long moment, his face revealing nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "You will have to excuse me," he said. "This has been a shock. Catherine, perhaps you could show Miss Hartwell to the drawing room. I need some time to think." Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. As Alexander left the room, his steps careful but sure, Catherine felt her heart breaking all over again. He had not rejected Penelope outright. He had not declared his love for Catherine. He was going to consider it, going to weigh his options, like a man choosing between 2 horses. Catherine led Penelope to the drawing room, her mind reeling. The other woman settled herself gracefully on the sofa, looking around the room with proprietary interest. "It is just as I remembered," she said with satisfaction. "I always loved this room." Catherine bit back the sharp retort that rose to her lips. "May I ask how long you intend to stay?" she said instead. Penelope smiled, and there was something sharp and calculating in her expression. "As long as it takes," she said. "Alexander needs time to adjust to the idea, but he will come around. We were meant to be together, you know. Everyone said so." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. "Everyone except Alexander, apparently," she said quietly. Penelope's smile faltered slightly. "He is confused," she said. "The accident, his isolation, it has affected his judgment, but I can help him heal, help him return to the man he was meant to be." Catherine stared at her, appalled by the woman's casual dismissal of Alexander's struggles. "He does not need to return to anything," she said firmly. "He is exactly who he is meant to be." Penelope laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. "My dear girl," she said, "you may have convinced yourself that you love him, but love requires more than pity. Alexander needs someone who knew him before, someone who can help him remember who he really is. He needs someone of his own class, someone who understands what it means to be a duchess." The words were like arrows, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. Catherine felt every insecurity she had ever harbored about her relationship with Alexander come flooding back. She was not his equal in birth or fortune. She was not the woman everyone had expected him to marry. She was just the governess who had come to help him through the winter, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. "Perhaps you are right," she said quietly, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. Penelope's smile was triumphant. "I knew you would understand," she said. "You seem like a sensible woman. Alexander will be grateful to you for making this easy." That evening, Catherine sat alone in her room, staring out at the garden where the first spring flowers were beginning to bloom. She could hear voices from downstairs, Alexander and Penelope talking in the drawing room. They had been talking for hours, and Catherine's imagination tormented her with possibilities. Was he remembering what they had once meant to each other? Was he realizing that Penelope could give him things that Catherine never could? She had always known this day might come, had always known that Alexander's past might reclaim him, but knowing it and living it were two very different things. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting Mary with her evening tea. Instead, Alexander entered, moving carefully across the unfamiliar room until he found a chair near the window. "Catherine," he said softly, "we need to talk." Catherine's heart clenched. Here it was, the conversation she had been dreading. He was going to tell her that Penelope's return had changed everything, that their winter together had been a beautiful dream, but nothing more. "I know," she said quietly. "You do not need to explain. I understand." Alexander frowned. "What do you understand?" he asked. Catherine took a shaky breath. "That Miss Hartwell is offering you everything I cannot," she said. "A return to your old life, a woman of your own class, someone who knew you before the accident. Someone who can be a proper duchess." Alexander was silent for a long moment, and Catherine felt her heart breaking with each second that passed. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "Is that what you think I want?" he asked. "A return to my old life?" Catherine looked at him, noting the way the lamplight played across his features, the way his hands rested calmly on his knees. "Is it not?" she asked. Alexander leaned forward in his chair. "Catherine, do you remember what you said to me the night we first kissed?" Catherine's throat tightened. "I said many things," she whispered. "You said you did not need me to see your beauty," Alexander said. "You said you needed me to feel it. Do you remember?" Catherine nodded, then realized he could not knee her. "Yes," she said. "Do you think Miss Hartwell understands that?" Alexander asked. "Do you think she sees anything beyond what I cannot do, what I cannot give her?" Catherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. "She sees the Duke," she said. "She sees the title and the wealth and the position." Alexander smiled, and it was sad and beautiful. "Exactly," he said. "She sees what I was, not who I am." Catherine stared at him, afraid to hope. "And who are you?" she asked softly. Alexander rose from his chair and moved toward her, his hand outstretched until it found her face. "I am a man who has learned to see with his heart," he said. "A man who has discovered that love is not about what you can see, but what you can feel. A man who would rather spend one day in the dark with you than a lifetime in the light with anyone else." Catherine's breath caught. "Alexander," she whispered. His thumb brushed away her tears. "I sent Miss Hartwell away," he said quietly. "I told her that my heart belonged to someone else, someone who loves me as I am, not as I was." Catherine felt her world shift back into focus. "You sent her away?" she asked. Alexander nodded. "I realized something tonight," he said. "When she was talking about the man I used to be, the life we could have together, I felt nothing. No longing, no regret, nothing but a desire for her to leave so I could come to you." He cupped her face in both hands. "You are my eyes, Catherine. You have been my eyes all winter, showing me not just what I cannot see, but teaching me new ways to see. I do not want to go back to who I was. I want to move forward with who I am becoming, with you beside me." Catherine threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight against her. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "I thought you would choose her, choose the life you had before." Alexander's arms tightened around her waist. "The life I had before was empty," he said, "full of obligation and duty and expectations, but empty of real joy. You have brought joy back into my world, Catherine. You have brought me back to life." They held each other for a long time, both of them shaking with relief and love. When they finally pulled apart, Alexander's face was serious. "I have something to ask you," he said. Catherine felt her heart begin to race. Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I cannot see your face when I ask this," he said, "but I can feel your heart beating. I can hear your breathing. I can sense your presence. That is all I need." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a perfect sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the lamplight like captured stars. "Catherine Fairfax," he said softly, "will you marry me? Will you be my eyes, my heart, my everything for the rest of our lives?" Catherine looked at the ring, then at Alexander's face, so hopeful and vulnerable in the lamplight. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alexander, I will marry you." Alexander's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "How did you know my size?" she asked, laughing through her tears. Alexander's smile turned mischievous. "I may be blind," he said, "but I am not unobservant. I noticed the ring you wear on your right hand, the one that belonged to your grandmother. Morrison was very helpful in obtaining the correct measurements." Catherine laughed, amazed by his thoughtfulness. "You have been planning this," she accused. Alexander nodded. "Since Christmas," he admitted. "I knew then that I could not let you go again." They were married 6 weeks later in the chapel at Ravens Hollow, with half the county in attendance. Catherine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly, and carried spring flowers from the manor's garden. Alexander stood at the altar, looking magnificent in dark blue velvet, his face turned toward the sound of her approach. When she reached him, he smiled and whispered, "You are beautiful." Catherine felt tears of joy slide down her cheeks. "How do you know?" she whispered back. "I can feel it," he said simply. The ceremony was beautiful, conducted by the village vicar, who had known them both since childhood. When Alexander slipped the wedding band onto Catherine's finger, his hands were steady and sure. At the reception, Catherine watched Alexander move through the crowd of well-wishers with newfound confidence. He had learned to navigate social situations without sight, using his other senses to identify people, engaging in conversations with grace and charm. "You have worked a miracle," Morrison said to Catherine as they watched Alexander laughing with a group of local gentlemen. "He is himself again, perhaps more than he ever was." Catherine smiled. "We worked a miracle together," she said. "He taught me that love does not require perfection, and I taught him that blindness does not mean darkness." Her wedding night was tender and beautiful, full of gentle exploration and whispered endearments. Alexander mapped every inch of Catherine's body with reverent hands, memorizing her with touch as he had once memorized her face. "You are perfect," he murmured against her skin. "Every part of you is perfect." Catherine felt beautiful under his touch, cherished and adored in ways she had never imagined possible. When they came together as husband and wife, it was with a passion tempered by deep, abiding love. Afterward, they lay entwined in the moonlight, Catherine's head on Alexander's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you happy?" Alexander asked softly, his fingers combing through her hair. Catherine lifted her head to look at him, noting the way the moonlight silvered his features. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said truthfully. "And you?" Alexander's smile was soft and content. "I feel like I have been waiting my whole life for this moment," he said. "For you in my arms, for the certainty that you will be there when I wake up tomorrow and every day after that." Catherine kissed his chest, tasting salt and man and home. "I will be there," she promised, "for all the days of our lives." Spring turned to summer, and Catherine threw herself into her new role as the Duchess of Ravenshollow. She and Alexander worked together to improve the estate, building new cottages for tenants, establishing a school for the local children, creating programs to help the less fortunate. Catherine discovered that she had a talent for organization and administration, while Alexander provided the vision and the authority to make their plans reality. They made an excellent team, complementing each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. The tenants and villagers, who had been uncertain about their blind duke, came to see that his condition had not diminished his care for them. Alexander continued to surprise Catherine with his adaptability. He learned to ride again with confidence, taught himself to identify birds by their songs, and even began painting, using texture and touch to create abstract works that captured emotion rather than visual reality. "I see differently now," he told Catherine one evening, as she described one of his paintings to him. "I see with my heart, with my hands, with my soul. Sometimes I think I see more clearly than I ever did with my eyes." Catherine understood what he meant. She too saw things differently now, saw beauty in unexpected places, found joy in simple moments. By autumn, Catherine was expecting their first child. Alexander was overjoyed, his hands constantly seeking her growing belly, marveling at the changes in her body. "I may not be able to see our child," he said one evening, as they sat before the fire, "but I will know every sound he makes, every movement, every breath." Catherine leaned back against his chest, his arms warm around her. She corrected with a smile. "I think it will be a girl," Alexander chuckled. Then, "I will know everything about her, except what she looks like." Catherine turned in his arms. "You will know the most important things," she said. "You will know her heart." Their daughter was born the following spring, exactly 1 year after their wedding. She came into the world with a lusty cry that made Alexander laugh with delight. "She has strong lungs," the doctor said, placing the baby in Catherine's arms, "and she looks just like her mother." Catherine looked down at her daughter, noting the dark hair and the tiny features that were indeed reminiscent of her own. When Alexander held the baby for the first time, his face was full of wonder. His large hands cradled her tiny body with infinite gentleness, his blind eyes filled with tears. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa." They named her Hope, for the hope that had sustained them through their long separation and brought them back together. As Hope grew, Alexander was a devoted father, learning to change nappies by touch, feeding her with patient care, singing lullabies in his rich baritone voice. Catherine watched them together with a heart full of love, amazed by the way Alexander adapted to fatherhood with the same determination he had shown in everything else. Hope seemed to recognize her father's voice from birth, quieting when he spoke to her, reaching for him with tiny hands. 2 years later, they had a son, James, followed by another daughter, Anne. Each child brought new joy to Ravenshollow, their laughter echoing through the halls that had been silent for so many years. Alexander was a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching his children through stories and songs and patient guidance. He could identify each child by their footsteps, their voices, even their breathing. "Papa knows everything," Hope would say proudly to visitors, and Catherine would smile, knowing it was true in all the ways that mattered. As the children grew, they never saw their father's blindness as a limitation. To them, he was simply Papa, the man who told the best stories, who could identify any bird by its song, who played the piano beautifully and taught them to dance in the drawing room. They learned early to be his eyes when needed, describing things to him with the casual matter-of-factness of children. "The roses are blooming, Papa," Anne would say. "They are pink and white and very pretty." Alexander would smile and thank her, filing away every detail she gave him. Catherine often thought back to that first winter, when she had agreed to be Alexander's eyes for a few months. She had never imagined that those months would turn into a lifetime of seeing the world together, of sharing every joy and sorrow, every triumph and challenge. Alexander had been right when he said he had waited 12 years to touch her face. But Catherine understood now that he had been waiting for something more than physical touch. He had been waiting for the touch of souls, the meeting of hearts that transcended anything mere sight could offer. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Catherine and Alexander stood together in the garden where they had walked as children, watching their 3 little ones play among the roses. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked softly. "Marrying a woman who started as your employee, who could never give you the society connections another duchess might have provided?" Alexander turned toward her, voice, his face full of love and certainty. "Never," he said firmly. "You gave me something no other woman could have given me. You gave me the ability to see with my heart." Catherine leaned against his side, watching Hope chase butterflies while James and Anne gathered flowers. "And you gave me something I had given up hoping for," she said, "a love that sees beyond surface beauty, beyond social expectations, beyond all the barriers that the world tries to put between people." Alexander's arm tightened around her. "We gave each other the gift of being truly known," he said, "of being loved not in spite of our flaws, but because of our whole, complete selves." Catherine smiled, remembering the scared young woman who had stood outside Ravenshollow's doors that first winter day, afraid to face the man who had broken her heart 12 years before. That evening, after the children were in bed, Catherine and Alexander sat together in the music room where he had first told her he loved her. Alexander played the piano, the same melancholy piece he had written after his accident, but now it sounded different. The sadness was still there, but it was tempered with joy, with the knowledge that beauty could be found even in darkness. "Play our song," Catherine requested. Alexander smiled and began the Mozart sonata they had heard at that long-ago concert, the piece that had been playing the night everything changed between them. When he finished, Catherine applauded softly. "Do you remember that night at the concert?" she asked. "When you said you always knew when I was watching you?" Alexander nodded. "I remember everything about that night," he said. "I remember wishing I could turn around and look at you properly, wishing I could cross the theater and ask you to dance." Catherine's heart swelled. "Why did you not?" she asked. Alexander was quiet for a moment. "Because I was afraid," he said simply. "Afraid of what I felt for you. Afraid of what it might mean. I was a coward then, Catherine. It took losing my sight to help me see clearly." Catherine rose from her chair and went to sit beside him on the piano bench. "You were not a coward," she said gently. "You were young and bound by expectations, just as I was. We both had to grow into the people we were meant to be." Alexander turned toward her, his hands finding her face with the automatic ease of long practice. "I have grown into the man I am because of you," he said. "You taught me that strength comes not from what we can do, but from how we choose to face what we cannot do. You taught me that love is not about seeing someone perfectly, but about accepting them completely." They sat together in comfortable silence, Catherine's head on Alexander's shoulder, both of them content in the knowledge that they had found their way to each other, despite all the obstacles that had stood in their path. Outside, spring rain began to fall, pattering against the windows with gentle persistence. "Listen," Alexander said softly. "Can you hear that?" Catherine listened. "The rain?" she asked. "No, deeper than that. Can you hear the garden growing? The flowers opening? The whole world coming alive again?" Catherine concentrated, and gradually she began to hear what he meant, the subtle sounds of renewal, of life returning after winter's sleep. "I hear it," she whispered. Alexander smiled. "That is what you sound like to me," he said. "Like spring coming after a long winter, like the world coming alive again." Catherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. Even after 10 years of marriage, Alexander could still surprise her with the poetry of his love, the depth of his understanding. "You sound like home to me," she said, "like everything I ever dreamed of, but never dared to hope for." They kissed then, gently and sweetly, a kiss that tasted of promises kept and love fulfilled. Later that night, as they lay in their bed, listening to the rain, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with duty, with her agreement to be his eyes for one winter, but duty had become something far more precious. A love that transcended the physical, a partnership that strengthened them both, a family that filled Raven's Hollow with joy and laughter. "Alexander," she said softly. "Man," he murmured sleepily, "I love being your eyes." Alexander's arms tightened around her. "And I love seeing the world through your heart," he replied. "Together, we see everything we need to see." Catherine smiled in the darkness, her hand resting over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm. She had agreed to be his eyes for one winter, never imagining that she would spend the rest of her life helping him see. But it had not been a sacrifice. It had been the greatest privilege of her life, to be trusted with his vulnerability, to be the one who showed him that blindness did not mean darkness. Alexander had waited 12 years to touch her face, but Catherine understood now that the waiting had been necessary. They had both needed to become the people they were meant to be before they could find their way to each other. The rain continued to fall outside their window, washing the world clean, preparing it for new growth. Inside Raven's Hollow Manor, the Duke and Duchess of Raven's Hollow slept peacefully in each other's arms, surrounded by the sounds of their children's gentle breathing from the nursery down the hall. They had found their happily ever after, not in spite of the challenges life had given them, but because of how they had chosen to face those challenges together. Love, they had learned, was not about perfect sight, but about perfect understanding, and in that understanding, they had found everything they had ever needed to see. The promise of the winter had been fulfilled beyond all expectations. Catherine had agreed to be Alexander's eyes, and he had waited 12 years to touch her face. But what they had discovered together was that the most beautiful things in life could not be seen with eyes at all, but only felt with the heart. In learning to see without sight, Alexander had taught Catherine to love without reservation. In teaching Alexander to see with his heart, Catherine had learned that true vision came not from what you could observe, but from what you chose to believe in. Together they had created a love story that proved the most powerful sight of all was the ability to see the beauty in each other's souls.